Welcome everyone to the Sensible Drug Policy Show created by Students for Sensible Drug Policy International. Here, we share insights from young advocates at the forefront of local, national, and international decision-making around drugs. Our network is an active force for reform in more than 30 countries around the world, and it's time you hear them talk. You will hear from policy experts, both current students and alumni, who will share their experience, tips, and insider knowledge about the most recent developments in the field. Right, awesome. Welcome to the show. It's great to host you today. This is our first episode ever of the Students for Sensible Drug Policy International podcast. Today's episode is about the UN, about the United Nations, and the awesome work that our members and students are doing at the United Nations every year. So just to quickly say, I'm Sarah. I'm your host for today. I'm also the development officer for SSDP International. Very excited and honored to host Roisin and Yulia today. Woohoo! So tell us who you are, if people don't know already, and let's get going.
Roisin Downs. I'm the Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy International, which is a grassroots organization of young people in over 30 countries across the world fighting to advocate for drug policies based in human rights and harm reduction. Yeah. That's why I'm Irish and I'm 24, if that's helpful as well.
Absolutely. Yulia?
Hi, I'm Yulia Vatau. I am the Global Fellow for Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and in my role, I manage our engagement at the United Nations and promote youth advocacy in those spaces. I am originally from Romania, but I'm currently based in the UK. It is truly amazing to see what young people there can achieve. And how much our voices there matter.
Awesome. Roisin, can you explain to us what is really like the UN? I mean, like United Nations, I mean, we know about the institution and that, often politicians or leaders go there to talk about world peace and development and so on. But how does that relate to drug policy and young people and what are we doing each year?
I think the UN is a pretty abstract concept for most people. Like, it's just kind of there. We don't really know how much it does and all this sort of thing. But basically, the UN has a bunch of different commissions these commissions are the things that make their policies, like make their rules and decisions they make happen through these. And the one we deal with is the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which is one of the most active ones and one of the most like kind of stronger, more enforced ones. And basically the commission exists because all of these countries that are members of the UN decided to come together to tackle what they call the world drug problem. We prefer the term world drug situation, but it's a whole thing. But yeah, so they all came together and decided they wanted to internationally schedule drugs, which was basically this big agreement where they're like, we're all going to have this bare minimum punishment and like attitude towards certain types of drugs, and we're going to schedule them in different ways. So we're going to recognize things like medical benefit, all this sort of thing.
Like in the 60s that they did this, right?
Yeah. So there's multiple conventions, which makes nobody knows how they work. Like I feel like half the people who work at these things don't know how these work. But there's 3 different ones, and yeah, I think it's the 1975 is one of them. Yulia, you can correct me if you know what the youngest one is.
The youngest one is like 1961. 61.
Yeah.
61, yeah. Yeah, and then 72
so
and then 80s or something.
Yeah. And they're actually so like the invention of these conventions, which really came from like the US. It was really pushed quite hard and is kind of modeled after the original convention, like the 61 is really modeled after the US model for international scheduling. And like,
that's how United States basically like helped spread the war on drugs that came from the United States to the whole world. And it's like one of the craziest policies out there, because like almost every country in the world like agrees that drugs are bad and drugs should be banned and illegal, which is actually a system that doesn't work.
And what's extra funny is that the US kind of really heavily influenced these, the creation and how these conventions look, and constantly like reaffirm their support for the conventions. Last year there was an anniversary of them, and they were all super, super strong in their reinforcement. But it's funny because the US is now in breach of the conventions with the cannabis legalization in different states, and has been like called out as this massive hypocrite within the UN for forcing these conventions on. And you could take a look at these conventions and look at it as like colonial kind of attitudes, that the US comes in, and mostly these Western countries have supported these conventions, because they were mostly Western countries were in the UN at the time, and many other countries weren't or didn't exist yet. So like the US comes in, they're like, we want it to look like this, and then they change their tune entirely later on. And these conventions have some of the worst effects on countries in the global south as well. So like it's weird.
Yeah, and so like, how does it happen that like, because you said that there's this commission on narcotic drugs, and it happens every year in March in Vienna, Austria, and how does it work? I mean, like, in a sense that there's these conventions that kind of seem like they're set in stone, and you can't do anything that's kind of against these conventions. But at the same time, we come together every year to discuss something, and we go there every year as a group to advocate for change. And at the same time, so what is really the change that we can, what is really the progress or the reform that we can make happen?
Yeah, so the commission every year, it does its scheduling. So oftentimes these are new drugs that come in and they all vote on it. This is generally just like, very similar, like analogs to different drugs and that sort of thing. So it's, not particularly interesting. And the drugs that are already within the schedules rarely ever change. Unless like particularly your major ones like cannabis, cocaine, any of those rarely have a change. We did recently have cannabis rescheduled, which was this huge, majorly contentious thing that happened and had been pushed by civil society for years, ourselves and others, for this rescheduling, for the recognition of the medical benefit. I won't go too much into detail about how all of this happens, but basically the World Health Organization is told to go review a drug and present their findings to the commission. Then all of the country representatives read that information and decide how they want to schedule a drug. So it's informed by the World Health Organization and evidence, but it's not the decisions are not necessarily based on research or evidence, based on what the country's opinions are. So that's where we come in, and we go and we try to be like, hey, you really need to look at this evidence. It's true. Go look at it. That's part of our advocacy attitudes.
Exactly.
But yeah, so they rescheduled it.
Yeah, and for the cannabis, I mean, like cannabis just before it was rescheduled, but what was it like the last 2 years ago, right?
Last year, right?
Last year.
December last year.
Yeah, last year. And so like so like before that, cannabis was in the worst schedule possible that said that it has no medical benefits. And that's crazy because there's so much research in so many countries actually also regulating cannabis for medical purposes. And there's so much scientific research supporting the fact that actually cannabis does have, for certain conditions and in certain contexts, that is well advised, has a lot of medical benefits, and sometimes even very important medical benefits, and makes a big difference for patients. So in that sense, like there's also like now initiatives to reschedule psilocybin, which currently is also on the worst possible schedule that says that there's no medical benefits, whereas that's completely contrary to the research that we have coming out from one of the like some of the best universities in the world, and institutions like the Imperial College of London or King's College or Johns Hopkins in the US, that says that psilocybin very much has medical benefits. So what do you make up of this kind of conflict or like a hypocritical kind of contrary attitudes that seem to kind of clash at the UN itself?
Yeah, so the commission is like extremely conservative, and it's far back in time. And one of the cool things about like interacting with the commission is you kind of see the global landscape, like what countries support what. And the major thing that is really notable is that the majority of countries in the world are entirely zero tolerance attitude towards drugs, have very limited health interventions. And so a lot of the like attitudes that you see at the commission is like what we might think of as like 20 years ago, right? Like talking about like access to needle and syringe programs and that sort of thing. That's radical for a lot of these countries because they're just further back in their policy development. So when we see things like the cannabis rescheduling, which only passed by one vote, which is crazy. It's they have to vote in this circumstance, and it's a 50-50 vote, and passed by one vote, and that was super contentious. And that's why, and like just to give a bit of context on the cannabis vote, the World Health Organization had provided the information, provided the research on medical cannabis years and years in advance, and it was due to be voted on for years, and it was repeatedly pushed off, particularly by the Russian delegation, claiming they didn't have time to read it. They just didn't have time to read. That was their excuse. At least in 2020, it was their excuse.
Maybe they didn't have time to read all the robust scientific data about how cannabis is beneficial for medical purposes.
Exactly. So so about psilocybin, there is a strong chance that like this will be rescheduled, and I think it definitely will be, especially as the commission over the last few years, at least in my experience, has been focusing a lot on this evidence-based. They add the term evidence-based to everything they're doing now, which, don't get too excited, the evidence is kind of pick and choosy a bit, but if similar to cannabis, the World Health Organization did their research and provided the research to the commission, where the World Health Organization recommends recognition for medical benefit. The commission, though they can put it off for years, will eventually have to vote. And whether or not they vote is really dependent on like what countries are supporting it, how controversial of a topic it is. Cannabis is like slightly more controversial, I think. Now, I might be wrong, this is just my opinion, than psilocybin, because cannabis is the flagstone for war on drugs, right? Like, this is what's been used, your gateway drug. You don't really have that with psychedelics. They have a stigma, but a different type of stigma, and that stigma isn't as worldwide as the anti-cannabis stigma. So I think the attitude towards that would be much different, particularly as we're seeing a lot of initiatives follow the pharmaceutical route, which is not necessarily the route that cannabis has always taken. So the attitude would be different. But yeah, that would be my opinion, but I might, the UN has a way of, forgetting about everyone's opinions.
That's incredible, and that's where you come in. So as kind of like a watchdog, and with all the activists that we're training, that attend our programs, and that kind of get to go to the UN every year, and just kind of spread out through the building, and come up to policymakers, decision makers, different delegations. There's even some of our colleagues from other youth organizations that have managed to become members or participate in their own country's delegation, which means that they get to sit in on important meetings with other country representatives, and kind of really have a seat at the table, which is super important. for young people to kind of have our voice heard in these discussions in the room, because the drug policy is often made in our name or for our sake, but without us participating or saying what we think, right? No matter on what kind of ideological side we are, it's just important that young people's voice is heard. Awesome. And now I have a question for both of you. So there is such a thing as a youth forum within the CND, within the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. Now, supposedly what I know about it is that it's sort of a sub institution that is supposed to, that brings young people from all the countries that are members of the Commission. And these young people often have a statement or have an opportunity to say something. Now I want to know what you think about the Youth Forum at the moment, and how is it working or not working, and what's your take on it?
Yeah, so the Youth Forum, there's many youth forums within the UN, but this is the UNODC, the UN Office on Drugs and Crimes Youth Forum. And its purpose is very unclear. We've tried to get clarity on it, on whether or not like the idea of the UNODC is to involve young people with in the decision-making process of the Commission, which is something we massively support, or if it's just this learning space for young people to learn about the UN, which is cool, but it's doesn't make sense why they would interact with the decision-making bodies in that case. The Youth Forum as a whole is something we've tried to engage with multiple times, and we've had some kind of success through covert methods of talking to Youth Forum representatives. So these countries get to send people to the Youth Forum. We don't know how they pick them. It seems to be up to the country, but there seems to be some selection criteria. We're unclear as to what that is. It's unclear as to which countries get invited, but we've been told that all countries are invited, but many countries have found it extremely difficult to send someone and to find any information about it. So oftentimes when we've talked to representatives of Youth Forum, they haven't had anything to do with drugs or drug policy or prevention or any of this sort of thing in their lives. And oftentimes it's not necessarily their first engagement with the UN, which like is fine, but leads us further to this question: if the purpose of the Youth Forum is to have young people involved in decision making, then how come these are young people who are not informed about drugs or drug policy?
Yeah, and why not put people there who actually have experience either in like activism in their own country or in be it prevention organizations or harm reduction organizations. Why not put experts there and not just people who can kind of, who are in a position to learn and receive. That's cool too, but make a difference.
It honestly does feel like tokenism to me, when you have a handful of random young people in a room and you're telling them about the UN, and then they have their speech written for them, is what the reports we've heard from representatives who attend the Youth Forum. And then they get to pick someone to speak it, and they basically prop up a young person in front of the commission and say, oh, you get to speak here, here's a speech we wrote for you, and you're representing the youth, which fine, but that's not youth representation, that's not youth engagement, that it just isn't. Like it's nowhere near it. And it is just tokenism, and it does feel like this box checking exercise of, okay, we've taken care of the youth, so let's move on. which just shows us how little they value youth engagement. And as they continue to create these policies that are, meant to be about young people, they're meant to protect young people, and they keep spouting all this evidence-based stuff, but they rarely look into any sort of research relating to young people or youth drug use. And we're sitting here being like, well, we are youth organizations. We're coming to you with our advice. We're coming to you trying to figure out how we can engage better, how we can do it. And we're doing the work, they're not doing very much. And your youth forum, which is your, mechanism for this, is clearly not functioning, or it's not even clear if that is the mechanism, right? So we're just showing up and we're like, okay, well, time to rock this show and like make it happen. We'll call them out on their thing. And we did that this year with our letter to the head of UNODC. We had like signatures from over 60 different organizations, and many of them were youth-led organizations. So we're just, we're fighting really hard and fighting our corner. And it's something I'm particularly passionate about because, young people have no access to policy forums, even on the national basis. Even in their own universities, they mostly don't have access to making the decisions that affect them directly. And we're here at like the highest level of this, we're showing up at the like hardest forum, and we're making sure that this is accessible to young people. Like that's what the UN training series is. We're making sure that young people can easily access this space, and when they get there, they know what to do and they know how to fight for their corner and for their like opportunity to speak. And yeah, so we're working pretty hard here.
That's incredible. This is amazing. Yeah, so it sounds like this youth forum thing is really it's really something that I mean, just from the way you talk about it, it looks like you've kind of as an organization you spent a lot of time kind of understanding the situation and understanding the mechanism of the purpose of the institution. What is the written purpose? What is the purpose in practice? And how does it actually work? And how do these people get there? And SSDP has been at the UN since I think like 2014 or 2015, something like that, right? So I guess the last 8 years or something. So it's a pretty good run to do this. And it sounds like, I mean, while they were talking, I was like, okay, well, Roisin, what's the strategy? How are we going to take over the youth forum? So that's pretty awesome. Julia, you've been working hard over the past couple of months on the UN training series by SSDP International. So could you tell us more about that? As I understand, it's a 5 or 6 months training program where people get to attend a session of 1 or 2 hours every month, and they learn how to get involved and engage with policymakers at the UN and get introduced about how the UN works.
Thank you so much for sort of drawing attention to how young people tend to not have a voice in these policymaking processes of the United Nations and even nationally, although a lot of the drug policies that we see today are, as you said, done in our name and for our protection and to safeguard children and ensure their futures, and that they have access to development opportunities and that they live safe. And it's very much tied to what they think is the young people's best interests. But oftentimes what we see at the UN is that young people are not part of the forums that make decisions on drug policies. They tend to be very immersed into what is happening on the ground in terms of drug policies. They have had relatives that have suffered due to different treatments that were just done in the name of abstinence, but not necessarily looking at the well-being of the person and how to sort of make sure that they are well in the first instance, and that they like that progression towards abstinence is actually beneficial to them, and it's done with their consensus and um with their participation. And I think with the UN training series, what we've tried is to draw attention to the kind of expertise that young people bring from their lived experiences, because of different violences that are perpetuated by drug policies, or because of their direct experience with drugs, and harm reduction. So our training is very much focused around giving young people access to advocacy opportunities and having their voices heard, and managing to equip them with the skills, the knowledge, and the connections to be able to go in international spaces and really drive meaningful change in terms of their representation, but also in terms of how we see young people being framed in resolutions that directly target prevention or any other aspect of drug policy.
The craziest thing about like the situation that you're describing is that the fact that like drugs are prohibited, so drugs are like illegal, right? Like you shouldn't use them, right? And they're bad and stuff like that. So that's the message that we're getting from this whole the conventions, right? The founding system, the founding kind of pillars of the system of prohibition and the war on drugs. But at the same time, we have access to drugs today that we've never had before. It's unprecedented. Drugs have spread so much in the last like 10 to 20 years, and the young people have access to drugs. If you ask like a room full of young people, so like I don't know 20 to 35, like do you know if you had to get drugs tomorrow, like would you know how to get them? Like I guarantee you a lot of people would raise their hand, because it's just so like there's access to it. So in this situation, saying to young people drugs are bad or you shouldn't use them, or say no to drugs, is just absolutely crazy. It's like hypocritical. Like we don't need to be told a moralizing like value, like judgment about this or that. We need to know how to stay safe. We need to know how to protect ourselves. We need to know what are the risks, like actually what are the risks, right? Because if you say, oh, this is 100% risky, whereas like it's actually not, right? Then when there's actual risk, like these people are not going to believe you. And that like so it's just like it's absolutely irresponsible to keep this type of policy in place. So thank you for training an army of young people that are going to explain to the adults how we should change this.
Yeah, definitely. I think the UN training series is really amazing in the way that I think it is unique in the way that it prepares young people, and in the way it is accessible to young people. I don't think there is any other training that is offered by current NGOs, whether they are reform oriented or prevention oriented, that actually look at empowering young people and really developing their skills and connections to be active in these spaces. So our training is unique in that sense, and it is not only open to our members from Students for Sensible Drug Policy. They are open to anyone that is a youth advocate, and ideally that is reform oriented. But I think we're not necessarily not open to having people from the other side participate as well. But what we have here is having opportunities for young people to develop their public speaking skills, develop the way they communicate, make connections with different stakeholders. We're trying very much to introduce young people to stakeholders and make them have conversations with them so that they come prepared and that they know how these forums work and what kind of change they can bring, and sort of already have those connections to be able to infiltrate in those spaces and have their voices heard.
Yes, excellent. And when is there going to be a next UN training series?
Well, for this year, we've actually finished the UN training series. We were always trying to finish the training before the Commission of Narcotic Drugs in spring. But we are hoping very much to run it again next year, and we're hoping to bring in more capacity to it. I think this year we've had amazing speakers coming from with different expertise. We had people from UNODC that managed to make a contribution and really connect with participants. We've had people from other NGO organizations such as the International Drug Policy Consortium come and sort of give their insights. So people were very much exposed to a wealth of information and different people coming from different sides of the drug policy advocacy space. And we're very much hoping to continue that next year, and we're hoping to do it in a bit of a more elaborate way and a bit more comprehensive. This year, we had a couple of knowledge focused sessions where we kind of introduce people to the UN forum and to like the UN forums and how they work, but also sort of some workshops based on public speaking and resolution analysis. And then at the end, we had a couple of networking sessions with stakeholders. But we're hoping to very much expand on it next year and be more involved and hopefully increase our capacity so that more young people benefit from it and that our training becomes even more comprehensive next year.
Awesome. So for people who want to join, I think it's a safe bet to stay tuned with SSDP International on social networks, and I'm sure that the end of this year or early next year, we're going to have some announcements for you about how to join the next UN training series.